Welcome to The View, featuring your host, Rolanda Horn, Shantae Harrell, and LaShonda Moore.
Good afternoon and welcome to our show. We have a very exciting show today. We will be talking about postmodernism. And I am your host, Rolanda Horn, America's #1 researcher, author, and educator. And I have my other two hosts here. I'm so happy to be sitting on set with these beautiful, intelligent, smart ladies today.
Oh, thank you, Rolanda.
We have Miss LaShonda Moore, who is America's #1 principal. She strives so hard to be. You want to tell us something else about yourself?
Yes, I would like to run for superintendent.
Okay.
In the future, I do see that, and also I have an 8-year-old daughter and a wonderful husband.
Okay, and you have our full support when you run for superintendent.
Thank you so much.
And we have Miss Shantae Harrell. She is the founder of Harrell's Academy and CEO of WizKids. What else would you like to tell us about yourself?
I am also a 2016 Caldecott Medal recipient.
Congratulations.
Congrats, that is wonderful.
So we've been discussing organizational theory and organizational culture the last couple of weeks, but we want to go back to the beginning. To know where you are going, you have to know where you came from, right? Would you ladies agree with that?
I totally agree.
Right, so we're going to go back to the beginning and talk about postmodernism theory, okay? So postmodernism is a term usually associated with art, literature, philosophy. It was a term that was developed back in the late 19th century, and it's believed to have come from either France or Germany. And if you don't know what France or Germany looks like, well, just look at your screen right now and you'll see a map of that. And it was used to describe pieces of unusual art. And if you look at the screen, ladies, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this piece of art, but if you look at the screen right now, audience, you will see a picture of Carl Andrus's rectangular pile of bricks. Okay? And the next slide that should come up should be a picture of Duchamp's. Is it Duchamp? How do you pronounce his name?
Duchamp.
Duchamp's fountain. Now,
And well, to me, Rolanda, that looks like a urinal.
it looks like a urinal, right? And what does the pile of bricks look like? Let's put that back on the screen.
A rectangle.
It looks like a rectangle. Some people thinks it looks like a step, a pile of bricks. So these pieces inspire people to ask, what is this, or what is this for? Postmodernism theory referred to art or literature that had more than one meaning. That had people wondering and guessing, what is this all about? Okay, so that gives you a little foundation of what it is. It came about after World War II, and I know that there's a lot of information that you guys would like to share with us, but before we start that, I would like to share a couple of core elements that deal with postmodernism. And the first one, if you turn your attention to the screen, you'll see that the first one is pure reason. Postmodernism says that we cannot assume that there is such thing as pure reason, or that by gaining more knowledge, the human race will necessarily progress. Okay? You guys want to chime in?
Yes, well, Rolanda, in my reading, it stated that postmodernism is full of self-contradiction.
Full of self-contradiction, okay?
Yes.
Right.
I agree. Just understanding from my reading, there's no definite answer to any solution. It's
Right.
always an in-between.
Right, and as we go to the second core element, which is language, postmodernism says that the language we use actually shapes what we see, how we feel, and it provides us with a framework through which we understand and make sense of the world. Okay, so basically, the language that we use shapes our perception of the things around us.
And so that goes along with the assignment that we had to do last week with the summary of the parent state, the child state, and the adult state.
Right.
And so with the parent state, the child looks at how their parents talk and their actions for them.
And they learn from their parents.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The third core element is pure knowledge. There is no such thing as pure knowledge. What we see and what we know depend upon the context in which we operate and the language available to us. Okay? And lastly, the last core element of postmodernism is different views. Postmodernism says that we must recognize that there are many different views of any situation and that we should attempt to find out different perspectives, particularly those from less powerful people. Some people rule and they manage and they think that their way is the only way and that their viewpoint is the only viewpoint. But postmodernism says that we should look to those who may be in a lesser position to us to gain knowledge about certain situations. Okay? So we're going to take a commercial break right now, and we'll be back and we will hear from the great Miss Chantel Harrell, who has a lot of good information to share with us. So sit back, eat you some popcorn, and we'll see you after this commercial break.
All right, welcome back, you all. I have the privilege of bringing to you all the 3 key thinkers of postmodernism. And if you take a look at your screen, they include Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and Jean-Francois Lyotard.
Your French is awesome.
Yes, and I love those names.
Yes.
So I have the privilege of bringing to you all their aspect on postmodernism.
Okay.
So let's start with Jacques Derrida. All right. He was born in Algeria and left at the age of 19 and went to Paris, where he continued his education and soon became a known philosopher to be rebellious. And wise because he attacked the traditional way of looking at literature and philosophies. And matter of fact, a lot of those who were detractors, who did not support him, called his work more so as frivolous or obscure. Even to the point at Cambridge University, did you know that there was a strike held to prevent him from getting an honors ceremony?
Really?
Yes. I was like, wow, very, very interesting. But what he brought to postmodernism was the fact that the term difference, he was able to give you 2 different meanings. Meaning difference in time and difference in space. And what he really was bringing to the table is that depending on your experience, determines on what you understand in language.
So that goes back to like the paintings that we showed the audience earlier.
Absolutely.
You know, your viewpoint on what is being seen may be different on this person's viewpoint or their interpretation of what's being seen.
Absolutely. And go ahead.
And even in my organization, my views of education may be different from the views of my parents and even my students, because their culture may be different from mine, and my viewpoint and their viewpoints may differ. So I totally understand what he was stating in that.
And you know, it's so much, especially being in the field of education, we teach children options. We don't teach them the in-between. And I remember one time in Dr. Grace's class when he was talking about opposites. When we teach about opposites, we say, oh, the opposite of hot is cold. But it's really not. It's really not. It's really warm.
Because it's that in between. You have cold over here, you have hot over here, but the warm is that in between. And that's what that philosopher was.
Absolutely. The difference. And of course, it also goes back to what you have experienced. So if you haven't experienced this in-betweenness, you don't really understand, which causes the conflict, which gives him the name of being a rebellious philosopher. So, very good, Mr. Jack. I like you. All right, our next philosopher is Jean-Francois Lyotard.
Francois. Everyone say Francois.
Francois.
Love it.
He was from Versailles, and of course, he went to Sorbonne in Paris. And he was a teacher and a philosopher as well.
How long did it take you to say these words?
Well, you know, I grew up. Okay, long story short. Anyway.
I mean, are you from France? Did you take French?
Well, I did have. I do know some foreign
languages. You say them so well.
Yes.
All right. So, ladies, back to Lyotard. He believed that these new technologies is ruining our truth. We're trading truth for technology. We want the efficiency, we want the data, and if it's not proven, it didn't happen.
So he didn't believe that there's a need for technology.
Well, he believes that the technology is replacing the thought, the critical thinking that is escaping us.
And I totally agree. Well, again, in my organization, in the educational field, it's like if it's not written, it's not documented, it did not happen.
Absolutely.
And see, it's the opposite for him.
Absolutely.
And I totally agree with the technology part, because we could just go to the computer and input the percentages, and then it's going to give it to us. Instead of us working it out.
Right. And I agree.
It takes out that critical thinking piece.
Absolutely.
Right. And I mean, I'm in higher education. But you know what? Every day I use my cell phone. And I don't know your number unless I ask Siri to dial it for me. So there's some truth to that.
And then the one thing that I liked about him is that he uses another researcher named Ferguson. And he was talking about the Holocaust. And he said the Holocaust didn't exist unless you have actual people who have experienced the Holocaust.
So if you didn't experience it, it didn't exist. It only existed to the people who actually experienced it.
Yes, and not even just that. If you can't sit here and tell me that what happened during the Holocaust, it didn't happen. But we all know that a majority of the people who experienced the Holocaust are not living. So, going back to Ferguson, he said that if he doesn't have an actual body to explain what occurred during the Holocaust, it didn't happen. So going back to you, audience, do you agree if you don't have factual information or someone who's experienced it, does it mean it didn't happen? Okay.
And now that you mentioned the Holocaust, the administration that is in the White House at this time, the observance day was a couple of weeks ago in February. Mm-hmm. They did, the current administration did mention the day. Okay. However, he did not mention the Jews that participated in the Holocaust. Wow. That were, So I think that was a cheap shot against them. Mm-hmm. If you're going to recognize the Holocaust, recognize everyone that took part. That's just like, living and deceased. Right. That's just like the bridge crossing that just took place in Selma. Right. You got to remember those that took part. Absolutely. Like Jesse Jackson. Right. He comes every single year to pay tribute to those who've come before him to pave the way. Absolutely. So I do think that was not adequate for him not mentioning the Jews.
I think it's important to celebrate history, and I really like hearing about these different viewpoints and these different key thinkers. It's a little interesting to me, though, that basically what I understand him to be saying, audience, and we would like to hear your response to this, is that, let me ask this, Ms. Harrell. Are you saying that if it's written down as an account of history, that he does not believe that it is a fact?
Right, you have to have an oral historian, somebody who has experienced that phenomenon, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's World War II. He feels like it has to be someone who has experienced that.
Okay, so if they're not here, if there's no one here to say it didn't happen.
Wow.
Okay, so I want to pose you already posed that question. So for me, with that, I totally disagree with that.
Right.
I totally
But then that goes back to this extreme. It's either one way or another. Either you have the evidence and the people who've experienced it, or you did not and it didn't happen.
Wow. Okay. So what about your third key thinker?
Okay, so moving on to our last key thinker is Michel Foucault.
Oh, love the last name.
A lady. It's
a him. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And that's one thing I've known through my reading that years, in those decades, the males had female names. Like, for instance, my grandfather, his name is Lindsay. And so when I say I named my daughter after my granddad, they was like, okay, that's his name. His name was Lindsay, so I totally understand with that.
Yes. Okay. So, mind you, this is one of my favorite philosophers now. Okay. One thing I loved about him is that he was his own person. And back in that time, homosexuality was something that was really deemed as like, oh, you don't do that. Mm-hmm. So his dad wanted to make sure that he followed his footsteps. His dad was a surgeon. But he said, no, I'm going to go and be a teacher. And he went and taught for 10 years in Algeria, where our first philosopher is from, which is in Africa. And then he went to be 10 more years as a philosopher. Okay. So one thing about him, he talks about power. And when we think about shaping knowledge, content, language, we're thinking about control. How we do like with our children. You follow my rules, you do what I say, and how I say it. And they believe that's how we construct our knowledge. And that's not necessarily true. Now, he did say that all disciplines, whether you're a scientist, whether you are a chemist, whether you are a doctor, all have some kind of connection when it comes to power and knowledge. Okay. However, he talks about 3 different types of power, which is sovereign power, where you have that hierarchy where that one person controls everything. Mm-hmm. And basically, one thing about it is when you have a hierarchy, they have this dramatic type of punishment. Thinking about back in the olden days when you would get caught stealing or doing, adultery, they would either hang you in front of the community or
put the letter A on you.
Yeah,
like the scarlet letter.
Right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, now we do that today. But we do it behind closed doors. We do it with prisons. We do it in ways such as you're getting pulled over. We see police brutality all the time. Right. So it's not so It's not so in your face like it was back in the day. But that sovereign power, they thought at one point was a way to teach people. If you walk by and you see somebody hanging from a tree or somebody who is basically put in front of the public in a negative way, it would scare you and make you want to do what's right.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Right.
Just like the video that surfaced over this weekend with the African American boy and the Caucasian little boy. They're 5 years old in kindergarten.
Yes.
And they said they wanted to be twins.
Right.
Well, they are twins, but they didn't want their teacher to tell them apart.
Exactly.
So the Caucasian child got his hair cut just like the African American.
Right.
And so that's how we know that prejudice is taught
Yes.
and it's not.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's a learned behavior.
That's a good point.
Absolutely. All right, and then his next power that he talked about is disciplinary power. And we all know that when your child or somebody does, especially like in class, when you do something that's inappropriate, we punish you. So it may be pulling you out of the class, you may be getting written up, you may get escorted out, things of that nature. Now, one thing about that is that you're monitoring that behavior. And necessarily, you don't have to have somebody always over you to monitor your behavior. For example, if you're in a meeting somewhere and something is hilarious, you know that it's not an appropriate time, you may have to pull back. You monitor your behavior without having someone to tell you to do that. Well, he says that's natural. Nobody has to stand over you and do that, So he talks about that type of power as well as biopower. Now, biopower focuses on a body or a whole population. Okay. Well, when you think about that, you think about Benito Mussolini, we talk about Adolf Hitler, we talk about
Stalin.
this, yes, Stalin.
Yes. Putin.
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein.
Right, absolutely. So,
Osama bin Laden.
Foucault said that
He's dead.
anyone can have these powers. Even little children have powers. You've seen the little brother run the little sister, right?
Terrorize
Well, he says that's not how we learn. We learn through discourse, how we communicate, the context, the rapport that we build. And he says the transactions.
Between
others.
Right.
Absolutely. So he says that knowledge is not consumed through power, but rather more than discourse. Can I have a mic so I can just drop it?
That was a really good point.
Yeah, that was a powerful statement
Right.
because it is. And that's why they say surround yourselves with people who are, I guess, that are growing.
Right.
Yeah.
That are where you want to go.
Absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. Wow, well, ladies, these were great points. I think that it's time for us to take a commercial break. And when we come back, Miss LaShonda Moore will have some great information to share with us as we wrap up our session on postmodernism. We'll be right back after this. Thank you. Welcome back to our show. Before we move on, we want to bring out a very important part about postmodernism. It is important to know, and as some of you have already heard from previous presentations in the previous chapters, that the postmodernistic view is the opposite of the modernistic view, okay? For example, I'll give you one quick example. If you have centralization in the modernistic view, in the postmodernistic view, you have decentralization, okay? So we wanted to bring out that point. And with that being said, we're going to turn to our lovely co-host, Ms. LaShonda Moore.
Thank you,
who's
Rolanda.
going to share some information with us.
Okay, the postmodern approach challenges the dominant assumptions of how we work in the world. Postmodernism describes the political and the aesthetic movements that exist as disciplinary, social, and narrative responses to the historical period defined as modernity. Now, postmodern is kind of like creativity, where you hold conflicting ideas in your mind. That's why they say it's never good to be with a group that always agree with you. What will you learn? So sometimes it's good to be with people who may have conflicting solutions or ideas.
Okay.
So I think that is wonderful. What do you use?
Well, listening to what you just said goes back to one of the key thinkers in their philosophy on what they're contributed to postmodernism. Basically, you want to be around people who are going to challenge you, who are going to sharpen you, who have something that you don't have, so you can come up to their level and learn from what they already know.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Shantae, anything?
Well, I agree. For one, you don't want a yes man. Yes man people or individuals are the ones that don't tell you the truth. And that can hinder you, especially if you're trying to progress in life or you're trying to go to another position. Instead of being honest with you, they're more of, oh yeah, and those aren't really your friends. Friends are sometimes brutally honest, but they're the ones that are going to pull you where you need to go and push you where you need to go.
And I think it's important that as we talk about organizations, how this point is relevant to today's organizations. If an organization wants to grow, if it wants to gain ground, if it wants to make money, depending on its purpose and its mission statement, it has to be willing to allow there to be some type of discourse, as you stated, conflict, as you stated, so that employees can have the opportunity to collaborate, disagree, and pull knowledge and information from each other that will cause the organization to expand and grow.
Yes. Wonderful. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 5 challenges of postmodernism.
She's been waiting for this point all day.
So, y'all ready?
Yes.
Yes, we're ready. Come on, Miss Hero. What's
First
the
challenge includes normal science.
And as you see on the screen, it reads, normal science does not aim at novelties of fact or theory, and when successful finds none.
All right.
All right.
Next one, Shantae.
Truth.
Truth.
And I would like to read this. It says, postmodernism challenges all truths and concludes that there is no such thing.
Wow.
If you look closely at atoms and electrons, it is hard to find any mass at all. Similarly, the more closely you challenge scientific and other truths, the less absolute truth may be found.
Absolutely.
Wow.
I agree with that. I agree. There's always a chance for the gray area. All right.
Yes.
Next challenge.
The next challenge is
Problematizing representation.
that is a big word.
Huge word.
All right.
All right. Next challenge. Problematizing.
Generalizability.
Yeah.
We had to practice that word a little bit together.
All right. And our last challenge, drum roll, is
Problematizing writing. Shantae, can you read what they see on the screen at this time?
All right. Process that starts with posing a question, problematizing a concept, evaluating an opinion, answering the questions or questions posed, or clarifying the problem,
Or arguing for a stand.
Does that sound like a word we always hear in Dr. Grace's class?
Yes.
Theory?
Yes.
theory.
Theory.
Yay,
Theories have to
theory.
be tested.
That's right. All right. Well, great.
Now, the last thing, I want to read this quote, and it is very deep. So, when I'm reading, think about it, and then we'll discuss it.
Okay.
By now, the perceptive reader may have grasped that postmodernism is guilty at times of intellectual cowardice, at other times of intellectual bullying, and at other times of intellectual laziness. And again, this is postmodernism. Ladies, what do you think?
Well, I think that they refer to it as being bullying and cowardness because there's always a challenge, okay? So you may actually state your viewpoint or state what you consider to be fact, but postmodernism says that that fact actually may be something else, or that that fact is not really true because there's no one alive or around to even argue or give you any more evidence of that.
Or insight, exactly.
Right.
And the one that sticks out to me is the laziness. You're too lazy to understand, or not even just understand, to take the effort to get a deeper understanding. If you say, oh, it's not there, it doesn't exist. Well, if you research or do a little bit more digging, you may get more information on that. And I like the fact that, you know, the idea of there is no neither here nor there is always that in between. Because think about it. Math is typically the only subject that has a definite answer.
Right.
And guess what? Math is the subject I like the least. I love social studies and science. Science is my favorite. Why? Because it has the gray area. It's always that what if, or that idea that something else may exist. So this section was awesome for me. I like postmodernism.
Yes,
Great.
it was awesome.
Well, thank you so much for joining our show. We hope that you had fun with us as we've had fun sharing this information. We hope you were able to learn something about postmodernism. So we are going to sign off right now. As we leave, we want to leave you with...
Don't forget multivariate analysis, statistics.
And take a little time to enjoy the view of postmodernism. Thank you.
Bye-bye.